morning, everyone. My name is Madison Blass, and I am the Executive Assistant for the Museum of Old Newbury. I was just saying that this is a virtual platform. This is a new way for community to gather, but we're so pleased that so many of you have joined us today for the reading. So first, I want to thank our partners, the First Religious Society, Unitarian Universalist, for hosting this event, and perhaps even more importantly, for allowing us and helping us transition to a virtual platform. So Justin and Kristen, thank you so much. We also owe thanks to Mass Humanities for their generous funding. This is actually just one of a series of readings statewide, supported by Mass Humanities, with the goal of opening up discourse between community members about race, rights, and our responsibility to the past and to each other. So for those of you who don't know, Newburyport actually holds a historical connection to Douglas. So after escaping brutal treatment and enslavement in Maryland, the brilliant young Douglas moved with his wife, Anna Murray, to New Bedford, Mass, and then later to Lynn. And while he was there, he became a pretty passionate follower of William Lloyd Garrison's abolitionist newspaper, Liberator. He began speaking to local anti-slavery groups about his life and experiences while enslaved. And his speeches were eloquent, passionate, and powerful, despite the verbal and physical abuse that he suffered while delivering those words of truth. So in 1841, as part of a tour organized by John Collins of the Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society, Douglas stopped here in Newburyport. He spoke at the Prospect Street Church on the corner of Fair and Prospect Street, and stayed at the home of abolitionist Richard Plummer on Federal Street. So I hope you all will join in continuing that legacy of community introspection and stay on the call after the speech for a discussion led by our humanities scholar. So I'd like now to direct your attention to Susan Edwards, who is the Executive Director for the Museum of Old Newbury, who will introduce our humanities scholar. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. We're delighted to have a new friend and colleague with us today to lead off Douglas's address and guide us through a discussion following the reading. Edward Carson is an independent historian, researcher, and author. He is the current Dean of Multicultural Education and a member of the History Department at the Governor's Academy in Byfield. After graduating from Alabama Christian Academy in his hometown of Montgomery, Carson earned a BA in History and Biblical Christianity and a graduate degree from Harding University. His current research looks at race, religion, and Black thought, particularly that of W.E.B. Du Bois. He has published and presented papers focusing on Black identity, religion, and the nature of history teaching. It is my great pleasure to introduce Eddie Carson.
Thank you, Susan. I appreciate that generous introduction. Welcome, brothers and sisters and non-binary folks. I appreciate you coming together with all of us today to celebrate July the 5th. And I say that intentionally. Douglas, who struggled with the 4th of July due to its framing of democracy, could not breathe, nor could all the other folks who were enslaved and in bondage by this American democracy screaming, "I can't breathe," like many of us today, feeling and being marginalized and oppressed in white spaces as the United States continues to be a farce when it comes to being an inclusive, democratic society. I am convinced that such readings as this will allow white people to self-reflect and ponder their white privilege. Events such as this will mend the problem of the 21st century, which, as W.E.B. Du Bois once claimed, was or is the color line. It will ask folks to stop saying "not racist," but activate them into action by really thinking about the role they play in changing the systematic structural problems here in American society. In our post-reading discussion, my questions will give you the freedom to reflect on this speech in thinking about how Douglass would respond to today's political climate in a post-Obama presidency and in a vicious age of white supremacy, American imperialism, and that of Donald Trump. I hope that you will pay particular attention in thinking about the history and the narrative of this country, and oftentimes what seems to be the absence of Black ideas, Black thought, Black history, as we bring it to the forefront a day after a celebration of the 4th of July. So thank you again, welcome. And as a collective note, I would applaud, I would ask that we all engage in this speech, because again, this is who we are, and this is what must happen as we think about the collective measures of bringing this country forward and really rectifying and addressing that of the color line. So thank you. Mr. President, friends, and fellow citizens, the task before me is one which requires much previous thought and study for its proper performance. I do not remember ever to have appeared as a speaker before any assembly more shrinkingly, nor with greater distrust of my ability than I do this day. The papers and placards say that I am to deliver a 4th of July oration. The fact is, ladies and gentlemen, the distance between this platform and the slave plantation from which I escaped is considerable, and the difficulties to be overcome in getting from the latter to the former are by no means slight. That I am here today is, to me, a matter of astonishment as well as of gratitude. This, for the purpose of this celebration, is the 4th of July. It is the birthday of your national independence and of your political freedom. This, to you, is what the Passover was to the emancipated people of God. It carries your minds back to the day and to the act of your great deliverance. This celebration also marks the beginning of another year of your national life, and reminds you that the Republic of America is now 76 years old. I am glad, fellow citizens, that your nation is so young. You are, even now, only in the beginning of your national career, still lingering in the period of childhood. I repeat, I am glad this is so. There is hope in the thought, and hope is much needed under the dark clouds which lower above the horizon.
Please continue.
My apologies, it disappeared. I will pull it back up here in a second. Fellow citizens, 76 years ago, the people of this country were British subjects. The style and title of your sovereign people, in which you now glory, was not then born. You were under the British crown. Your fathers esteemed the English government as the home government, England as the fatherland, although a considerable distance from your home, imposed in the exercise of its parental prerogatives upon its colonial children such restraints, burdens, and limitations as, in its mature judgment, it deemed wise, right, and proper but your fathers, who had not adopted the idea of the infallibility of government and the absolute character of its acts, presumed to differ from the home government in respect to the wisdom and the justice of some of those burdens and restraints. They went so far as to pronounce the measures of government unjust, unreasonable, and oppressive, and altogether such as ought not be quietly submitted to. I scarcely need to say, fellow citizens, that my opinion of those measures fully accords with that of your fathers. Feeling themselves harshly and unjustly treated by the home government, your fathers, like men of honesty and men of spirit, earnestly sought redress. They petitioned and remonstrated. They did so in a decorous, respectful, and loyal manner. This, however, did not answer the purpose. They saw themselves treated with sovereign indifference, coldness, and scorn, and yet they persevered.
Joe Vecchione, you're invited to read paragraph 5.
Oppression makes a wise man mad. Your fathers became restive under this treatment. They felt themselves the victim of grievous wrongs, wholly incurable in their colonial capacity. With brave men, there is always a remedy for oppression. Just here, the idea of a total separation of the colonies from the crown was born. It was a startling idea, much more so than we, at this distance of time, regard it. The timid and the prudent of that day were, of course, shocked and alarmed by it. Their opposition to the then dangerous thought was earnest and powerful. But amid all their terror and affrighted vociferations against it, the alarming and revolutionary idea moved on, and the country with it.
Mara Flynn, you're invited to read paragraph 6.
On the 2nd of July, 1776, the Old Continental Congress, to the dismay of the lovers of ease and the worshippers of property, clothed that dreadful idea with all the authority of national sanction. They did so in the form of a resolution. We seldom hit upon resolutions drawn up in our day whose transparency is at all equal it. Resolved that these united colonies are, and of right, ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown.
Diane Klein, you're invited to read paragraph 7.
Citizens, your fathers made good that resolution. They succeeded, and today you reap the fruits of their success. The freedom gained is yours, and you, therefore, may properly celebrate this anniversary. The 4th of July is the first great fact in your nation's history, the very ring bolt in the chain of your yet undeveloped destiny.
Hugh Martinez, you're invited to read paragraph 8.
Pride and patriotism, not less than gratitude, prompt you to celebrate and to hold it in perpetual remembrance. I have said that the Declaration of Independence is the ring bolt to the chain of your nation's destiny. So indeed I regard it. The principles contained in that instrument are saving principles. Stand by those principles. Be true to them on all occasions, in all places, against all foes, and at whatever cost.
Kathy Deslitz, paragraph 9. You may have to accept the unmute.
Oh, okay. Pride and patriotism, not less than gratitude, prompt you to celebrate and to hold it in perpetual remembrance. I've said that the Declaration of Independence is the ringbolt in the chain of your nation's destiny. So, indeed, I regard it. The principles contained in that instrument are saving principles. Stand by those principles. Be true to them on all occasions, in all places, against all costs, and at whatever cost.
Paul W., paragraph 9.
Fellow citizens, I am not wanting in respect for the fathers of this republic. The signers of the Declaration of Independence were brave men. I cannot contemplate their great deeds with less than admiration. They were statesmen, patriots, and heroes, and for the good they did and the principles they came for, I will unite with you to honor their memory.
Alex Matthews, paragraph 10.
They loved their country better than their own private interests, and all will concede that it is a rare virtue that ought to command respect. He who will intelligently lay down his life for his country is a man whom it is not in human nature to despise. Your fathers staked their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor on the cause of their country. In their admiration of liberty, they lost sight of all other interests.
Ann Hauser, paragraph 11.
They were peacemen, but they preferred revolution to peaceful submission to bondage. They were quiet men, but they did not shrink from agitating against oppression. They showed forbearance, but they knew its limits. They believed in order, but not in the order of tyranny. With them, nothing was settled that was not right. With them, justice, liberty, and humanity were final, not slavery and oppression. You may well cherish the memory of such men. They were great in their day and generation. Their solid manhood stands out the more as we contrast it with these degenerate times.
Bill Quigley, paragraph 12.
How circumspect, exact, and proportionate were all of their movements. How unlike the politicians of an hour. Their statesmanship looked beyond the passing moment and stretched away in strength into the distant future. Mark them, fully appreciating the hardship to be encountered, firmly believing in the right of their cause, wisely measuring the terrible odds against them, your fathers, the fathers of this republic, laid the cornerstone of the national superstructure, which has risen and still rises in grandeur around you.
Helen Mulkey, paragraph 13.
Of this fundamental work, this day is the anniversary. Our eyes are met with demonstrations of joyous enthusiasm. The causes which led to the separation of the colonies from the British Crown have never lacked for a tongue. They have all been taught in your common schools, narrated at your firesides, unfolded from your pulpits, and thundered from your legislative halls, and are as familiar to you as household words. They form the staple of your national poetry and eloquence. I leave, therefore, the great deeds of your fathers to others.
Sally Benjamin, paragraph 14.
My business, if I have any here today, is with the present. The accepted time with God and his cause is the ever-living now, We have to do with the past only as we can make it useful to the present and to the future. Now is the time, the important time. Your fathers have lived, died, and done their work, and have done much of it well. You live and must die. You must do your work. You have no right to enjoy a child's share in the labor of your fathers, unless your children are to be blessed by your labors. You have no right to wear out and waste the hard-earned fame of your fathers to cover your indolence.
Beth B, paragraph 15.
Fellow citizens, pardon me, allow me to ask, why am I called upon to speak here today? What have I or those I represent to do with your national independence? Are the great principles of political freedom and of natural justice embodied in that Declaration of Independence extended to us? And am I, therefore, called upon to bring our humble offering to the national altar and to confess the benefits and express devout gratitude for the blessings resulting from your independence to us?
Nanny Almquist, paragraph 16. You may have to select to unmute.
Would to God, both for your sakes and ours, that an affirmative answer could be truthfully returned to these questions. Then would my task be light and my burden easy and delightful, but such is not the state of the case. I say it with a sad sense of the disparity between us. I am not included within the pales of this glorious anniversary. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us.
Tom Himmel, paragraph 17.
The blessings in which you this day rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me. The sunlight that brought life and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice, I must mourn. To drag a man in fetters into the grand illuminated temple of liberty and call upon him to join you in joyous anthems were inhuman mockery and sacrilegious irony. Do you mean, citizens, to mock me by asking me to speak today?
Holly Cashman, paragraph 18.
Fellow citizens, above your national tumultuous joy, I hear the mournful wail of millions, whose chains, heavy and grievous yesterday, are today rendered more intolerable by the jubilee shouts that reach them. To forget them, to pass lightly over their wrongs, and to chime in with the popular theme would be treason most scandalous and shocking, and would make me a reproach before God and the world.
Tina, paragraph 19.
My subjects, then fellow citizens, is American slavery. I shall see this day from the slave's point of view. Standing here, identified with American bondsman, making his wrongs mine, I do not hesitate to declare with all my soul that the character and conduct of this nation never looked blacker to me than on the 4th of July. Whether we turn to the declarations of the past or to the professions of the present, the conduct of the nation seems equally hideous and revolting. America is false to the past, false to the present, and solemnly binds herself to fault to the future.
Jack Santos, paragraph 20.
Standing with God and the crushed and bleeding slave on this occasion, I will, in the name of humanity, which is outraged, in the name of liberty, which is fettered, in the name of the Constitution and the Bible, which are disregarded and trampled upon, dare to call in question and to denounce with all the emphasis I can command everything that serves to perpetuate slavery, the great sin and shame of America. I will not equivocate. I will not excuse. I will use the severest language I can command, and yet not one word shall escape me that any man whose judgment is not blinded by prejudice or who is not at heart a slaveholder shall not confess to be right and just.
Maureen Nguyen, paragraph 21.
I fancy I hear some of my audience say, it is just in this circumstance that you and your brother abolitionists fail to make a favorable impression on the public mind. Would you argue more and denounce less? Would you persuade more and rebuke less? Your cause would be much more likely to succeed. But I submit, where all is plain, there's nothing to be argued. What point in the anti-slavery creed would you have me argue? On what branch of the subject do the people of this country need light?
At this time, people are invited to read again if they would like. Currently, we have no one with a raised hand. So I will recognize Joe Vecchione again to read paragraph 22.
Thank you. Must I undertake to prove that the slave is a man? The slaveholders themselves acknowledge it in the enactment of laws for their government. They acknowledge it when they punish disobedience on the part of the slave. There are 72 crimes in the state of Virginia which, if committed by a black man, subject him to the punishment of death, while only 2 of the same crimes will be subject a white man to the like punishment. What is this but the acknowledgement that slave is a moral, intellectual, and responsible being?
Mara Flynn, paragraph 23.
Southern statute books are covered with enactments forbidding, under severe fines and penalties, the teaching of the slave to read or to write. When you can point to any such laws in reference to the beasts of the field, then I may consent to argue the manhood of the slave. When the dogs in your streets, when the fowls of the air, when the cattle on your hills, when the fish of the sea and the reptiles that crawl shall be unable to distinguish the slave from a brute, then I will argue with you that the slave is a man.
I want to give the phone number whose name shows up as owner a chance to speak, who did not get a chance because it was eaten by Zoom, to read paragraph 24, if you are able to unmute yourself. Are you there? If you do not begin reading, we'll have to move on. Ann Hauser, please read paragraph 24.
Is it not astonishing that while we are plowing, planting, and reaping, using all kinds of mechanical tools, erecting houses, constructing bridges, building ships, working in metals of brass, iron, copper, silver, and gold, that while we are reading, writing, and ciphering, acting as clerks, merchants, and secretaries, having among us lawyers, doctors, ministers, poets, authors, editors, orators, and teachers, that while we are engaged in all manner of enterprises common to other men, digging gold in California, capturing the whale in the Pacific, feeding sheep and cattle on the hillside, living, moving, acting, thinking, planning, living in families as husbands, wives, and children, and above all, confessing and worshiping the Christian's God, and looking hopefully for life and immortality beyond the grave, we are called upon to prove that we are men.
Holly Cashman, paragraph 25.
Would you have me argue that man is entitled to liberty? That he is the rightful owner of his own body? You have already declared it. Must I argue the wrongfulness of slavery? Is it to be settled by the rules of logic and argumentation as a matter beset with great difficulty, involving a doubtful application of the principle of justice, hard to be understood? How should I look today in the presence of Americans to show that men have a natural right to freedom? To do so would be to make myself ridiculous and to offer an insult to your understanding. There is not a man beneath the canopy of heaven that does not know that slavery is wrong for him.
Kathy Desilets, paragraph 26.
What? Am I to argue that it is wrong to make men brutes, to rob them of their liberty, to work them without wages, to keep them ignorant of their relations to their fellow men, to beat them with sticks, to flay their flesh with the lash, limbs with irons, to hunt them with dogs, to sell them at auction, to sunder their families, to knock out their teeth, to burn their flesh, to starve them into obedience and submission to their masters? Must I argue that a system thus marked with blood and stained with pollution is wrong? No, I will not. I have better employments for my time and strength than such arguments would imply.
For paragraph 27, we're going to try the landline owner again. You were invited to read paragraph 27. It seems like we're having some technical problems, so we'll move on to Paul W. to read paragraph 27.
What then remains to be argued? Is it that slavery is not divine, that God did not establish it, that our doctors of divinity were mistaken? There is blasphemy in the thought. That which is inhuman cannot be divine. Who can reason on such a proposition? I cannot. The time for such argument is past.
Sally Benjamin, paragraph 28.
At a time like this, scorching irony not convincing argument, is needed. Oh, had I the ability and could I reach the nation's ear, I would today pour out a fiery stream of biting ridicule, blasting reproach, withering sarcasm, and stern rebuke. For it is not light that is needed, but fire. It is not the gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake. The feeling of the nation must be quickened. The conscience of the nation must be roused. The propriety of the nation must be startled. The hypocrisy of the nation must be exposed, and its crimes against God and man must be proclaimed and denounced.
Greg Calling, paragraph 29.
What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him, more than all other days in the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham. Your boasted liberty, an unholy license, your national greatness, swelling vanity, your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless. Your denunciations of tyrants, brass-fronted impudence, your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery, your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings, with all your religious parade and solemnity, are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy, a thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages.
We're going to try our landline person one more time. You, owner, you are welcome to speak now on paragraph 30. We'll see if it works. Doesn't look like it's going to work today. I do apologize for that. Zoom is not a perfect system. For paragraph 30, we'll go to Deborah, please. And do make sure to agree to the unmute.
There is not a nation on the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of these United States at this very hour. Go where you may, search where you will, roam through all the monarchies and despotisms of the old world, search out every abuse, and when you have found the last, lay your facts by the side of the everyday practices of this nation, and you will say with me that for revolting barbarity and shameless hypocrisy, America reigns without a rival.
We're going to go to Ronald Hertel for paragraph 31.
Take the American slave trade, which we are told by the papers is especially prosperous just now, as the price of men were never higher, and which is carried on in all the large towns and cities in one half of this Confederacy. This trade is one of the peculiarities of American institutions. In several states, this trade is a chief source of wealth. It is called the internal slave trade, in order to divert from the horror in which the foreign slave trade is contemplated.
Hugh Martinez, paragraph 32.
The foreign slave trade has long since been denounced by this government as piracy, as an execrable traffic. To arrest it, this nation keeps a squadron at immense cost on the coast of Africa. Everywhere in this country, it is safe to speak of this foreign slave trade as a most inhuman traffic, opposed alike to the laws of God and of man. It is, however, a notable fact that, while so much execration is poured out by Americans upon those engaged in the foreign slave trade, the men engaged in the slave trade between the states pass without condemnation, and their business is deemed honorable.
Diane Klein, paragraph 33.
All right. Behold the practical operation of this internal slave trade, the American slave trade, sustained by American politics and American religion. Here you will see men and women reared like swine for the market. You know what is a swine drover? I will show you a man drover. They inhabit all our southern states. They perambulate the country and crowd the highways of the nation with droves of human stock. You will see one of these human flesh jobbers armed with pistol, whip, and bow knife, driving a company of 100 men, women, and children from the Potomac to the slave market at New Orleans. These wretched people are to be sold singly or in lots to suit purchasers. They are food for the cotton fields and the deadly sugar mill.
Nancy Almquist, paragraph 34.
Mark the sad procession as it moves wearily along, and the inhuman wretch who drives them. Hear his savage yells and his blood-chilling oaths as he hurries on his affrighted captives. There, see the old man with locks thinned and gray. Cast one glance, if you please, upon the mother whose shoulders are bare to the scorching sun, her briny tears falling on the brow of the babe in her arms. See too that a girl of 13 weeping, yes, weeping, as she thinks of the mother from whom she has been torn. The drove moves tardily. Heat and sorrow have nearly consumed their strength. Suddenly, you hear a quick snap, like the discharge of a rifle. The fetters clank, and the chains rattle simultaneously. Your ears are saluted with a scream that seems to have torn its way to the center of your soul. The crack you heard was the sound of the slave whip. The scream you heard was from the woman you saw with the babe. Her speed had faltered under the weight of her child and her chains. The gash on her shoulder tells her to move on.
Bill Quigley, paragraph 35.
Follow this drove to New Orleans. Attend the auction. See men examined like horses. See the forms of women rudely and brutally exposed to the shocking gaze of American slave buyers. See this drove sold and separated forever. And never forget the deep, sad sobs that arose from that scattered multitude. Tell me, citizens, where, under the sun, you can witness a spectacle more fiendish and shocking. Yet this is but a glance at the American slave trade as it exists at this moment in the ruling part of the United States.
Lori, paragraph 36.
I was born amid such sights and scenes. To me, the American slave trade is a terrible reality. The fleshmongers gather up their victims by dozens and drive them, chained, to the General Depot at Baltimore. When a sufficient number has been collected here, a ship is chartered for the purpose of conveying the forlorn crew to Mobile or to New Orleans. From the slave prison to the ship, they are usually driven in the darkness of night. In the deep, still darkness of midnight, I have been often aroused by the dead, heavy footsteps and the piteous cries of the chained gangs that passed our door.
Suzanne, paragraph 37.
Fellow citizens, this murderous traffic is today an active operation in this boasted republic. In the solitude of my spirit, I see clouds of dust raised on the highways of the South. I see the bleeding footsteps. I hear the doleful wail of fettered humanity on the way to the slave markets where the victims are to be sold like horses, sheep, and swine, knocked off to the highest bidder. There I see the tenderest ties ruthlessly broken to gratify the lust, caprice, and rapacity of the buyers and sellers of men. My soul sickens at the sight.
Helen Mulkey, paragraph 38.
But a still more inhuman, disgraceful, and scandalous state of things remains to be presented. By an act of the American Congress, not yet 2 years old, slavery has been nationalized in its most horrible and revolting form. Mason and Dixon's line has been obliterated. New York has become as Virginia, and the power to hold, hunt, and sell men, women, and children as slaves remains no longer a mere state institution, but is now an institution of the whole United States.
Ann Verrett Speck, paragraph 39.
The power is coextensive with the Star-Spangled Banner and American Christianity. Where these go, may also go the merciless slave hunter. Where these are, man is not sacred. He is a bird for the sportsman's gun. By that most foul and fiendish of all human decrees, the liberty and person of every man are put in peril. Your broad Republican domain is hunting ground for men.
Tom Mella, paragraph 40.
Your lawmakers have commanded all good citizens to engage in this hellish sport. Your president, your secretary of state enforce as a duty you owe to your free and glorious country and to your God that you do this accursed thing. Not fewer than 40 Americans have, within the past 2 years, been hunted down and, without a moment's warning, hurried away in chains and consigned to slavery and excruciating torture. Some of these have had wives and children dependent on them for bread, but of this no account was made. The right of the hunter to his prey stands superior to the right of marriage and to all rights in this republic, the rights of God included.
Beth B., paragraph 41.
For Black men, there is neither law nor justice, humanity nor religion. The fugitive slave law makes mercy to them a crime and bribes the judge who tries them. An American judge gets $10 for every victim he consigns to slavery, and 5 when he fails to do so. The oath of any 2 villains is sufficient under this hell-black enactment to send the most pious and exemplary Black man into the remorseless jaws of slavery. His own testimony is nothing. He can bring no witnesses for himself. The minister of American justice is bound by the law to hear but one side, and that side is the side of the oppressor.
Lark Madden, paragraph 42.
Let this damning fact be perpetually told. Let it be thundered around the world that in tyrant-killing, king-hating, people-loving, democratic, Christian America, the seats of justice are filled with judges who hold their offices under an open and palpable bribe. and are bound in deciding in the case of a man's liberty to hear only his accusers.
Marty Chalmers, paragraph 43.
In glaring violation of justice, in shameless disregard for the forms of administrating law, in cunning arrangement to entrap the defenseless, and in diabolical intent, this fugitive slave law stands alone in the annals of tyrannical legislation.
Jack Santos, paragraph 44.
Americans, your Republican politics, not less than your Republican religion, are flagrantly inconsistent. You boast of your love of liberty, your superior civilization, and your pure Christianity, while the whole political power of the nation is solemnly pledged to support and perpetuate the enslavement of 3 millions of your countrymen. You hurl your anathemas at the crowned-headed tyrants of Russia and Austria and pride yourselves on your democratic institutions, while you yourselves consent to be the mere tools and bodyguards of the tyrants of Virginia and Carolina.
Tina, paragraph 45.
You invite your shores fugitives of oppression from abroad. Honor them with banquets, greet them with ovations, cheer them, toast them, salute them, protect them, and pour out your money to them like water. But the fugitives from your own land, you advertise, hunt, arrest, shoot, and kill. Your glory is your refinement and your universal education. Yet you maintain a system as barbarous and dreadful as ever stained the character of a nation, a system begun in avarice, supported in pride, and perpetuated in cruelty.
William Clary, paragraph 46.
You shed tears over fallen Hungary and make the sad story of her wrongs the theme of your poets, statesmen, and orators, till your gallant sons are ready to fly to arms to vindicate her cause against the oppressor. But in regard to the 10,000 wrongs of the American slave, you would enforce the strictest silence and would tell him as an enemy of the nation who dares to make those wrongs the subject of public discourse. You are all on fire at the mention of liberty for France or for Ireland, but as cold as an iceberg at the thought of liberty for the enslaved of America.
Tom Himmel, paragraph 47.
You discourse eloquently on the dignity of labor, yet you sustain a system which in its very essence casts a stigma upon labor. You can bear your bosom to the storm of British artillery to throw off a 3-penny tax on tea, and yet wring the last hard-earned farthing from the grasp of the black laborers of your country. You profess to believe that of one blood God made all nations of men to dwell on the face of all the earth, and hath commanded all men everywhere to love one another. Yet you notoriously hate and glory in your hatred all men whose skins are not colored like your own.
Mary Sortel, paragraph 48.
You declare before the world, and are understood by the world to declare, that you hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And yet you hold securely in a bondage which, according to your own Thomas Jefferson, is worse than ages that which your fathers rose in rebellion to oppose, a seventh part of the inhabitants of your country.
Don Shand, paragraph 49.
I've raised my hand several times.
Fellow citizens, I will not enlarge further on your national inconsistencies. The existence of slavery in this country brands your republicanism as a sham, your humanity as a base pretense, and your Christianity as a lie. It destroys your moral power abroad. It corrupts your politicians at home. It saps the foundation of religion. It makes your name a hissing and a word to a mocking earth.
Before we continue, if there's somebody who feels like they've raised their hand but has not been called on and I didn't see it, just send me a private message and I'll make sure you get to read one of these final paragraphs. But for right now, we'll move to Helen Murgida to read paragraph 50.
It is the antagonistic force in your government, the only thing that seriously disturbs and endangers your union. It fetters your progress. It is the enemy of improvement, the deadly foe of education. It fosters pride. It breeds insolence. It promotes vice. It shelters crime. It is a curse to the earth that supports it. And yet you cling to it as if it were the sheet anchor of all your hopes. Be warned. A horrible reptile is coiled up in your nation's bosom. The venomous creature is nursing at the tender breast of your youthful republic. For the love of God, tear away and fling from you the hideous monster, and let the weight of 20 millions crush and destroy it forever.
For paragraph 51, we'll go to Ray Wilson.
But it is answered in reply to all this that precisely what I have now denounced is in fact guaranteed and sanctioned by the Constitution of the United States, that the right to hold and to hunt slaves is a part of that Constitution framed by the illustrious fathers of this republic. Then I dare to affirm, notwithstanding all I have said before, your fathers, instead of being the honest men I have before declared them to be, were the veriest impostors that ever practiced on mankind. This is the inevitable conclusion, and from it there is no escape. But I differ from those who charge this baseness to the framers of the Constitution of the United States. It is a slander upon their memory, at least, so I believe. And others have, as I think, fully and clearly vindicated the Constitution from any design to support slavery for an hour.
To close us out, we will return to Edward Carson to read our last two paragraphs.
Allow me to say, in conclusion, notwithstanding the dark picture I have this day presented of the state of the nation, I do not despair of this country. There are forces in operation which must inevitably work to the downfall of slavery. I, therefore, leave off where I began, with hope, while drawing encouragement from the Declaration of Independence, the great principles it contains, and the genius of American institutions. My spirit is cheered by the obvious tendencies of the age. Nations do not now stand in the same relation to each other that they did ages ago. No nation can now shut itself up from the surrounding world and trot around in the same old path of its fathers without interference. The time was when such could be done, but a change has now come over the affairs of mankind. Walled cities and empires have become unfashionable. The arm of commerce has borne away the gates of the strong city. Intelligence is penetrating the darkest corners of the globe. Wind, stream, and lightning are its chartered agents. Oceans no longer divide, but link nations together. From Boston to London is now a holiday excursion. Space is comparatively annihilated. Thoughts expressed on one side of the Atlantic are distinctly heard on the other. In the fervent aspirations of William Lloyd Garrison, I say, and let every heart join in saying it. Folks, I'm going to ask all of you, if you will, just to read aloud in your spaces the poem that follows with me collectively as brothers and sisters and non-binary folks, as we say, Godspeed
the day
when
human blood shall cease to flow.
In every
Every clime
be
be understood,
the climbs of human brotherhood, and each
return for
good,
good,
not blow for blow,
blow for blow.
That day will
That day
come,
will
all
come,
feuds to
feuds to
end,
end,
and change to
into
a faithful friend,
each foe.
each foe. You know, in the time we have left, you know, I have a couple of thoughts and some questions that I'd like to ask those of you who are still with us for our remaining minutes together, and like to open this up for a conversation. And feel free to give your thoughts here. No, in reading this passage, Douglas used terms like you and your fathers and my fathers, which makes people like me at times wonder, are those really my folks? Are those really my people? I don't use words such as founding fathers. I use framers in that sense. Those are the things that really draw this sense of discomfort. Did you hear any pathway to reconcile this tenuous situation between Black and white folks in Douglas' speech?
And Diane has the right idea. Since we are many, many people, raising your hand is a great way to share your thoughts, and I will make sure to recognize each one of you as we go along, just to make it easy for everybody. So Diane, please do go ahead.
I just wanted to add, I forgot your question. I got distracted, but I just want to add how meaningful this speech is today. I just can't get over it. I have fortunate to have been participating with the Unitarians. This is the fourth reading, and it's different every time, but each time it becomes more meaningful. Really, with what's going on, this is so important. Thank you.
Thank you, sister. We appreciate that. Any other folks like to add their own independent thoughts about the speech, or to refer to my question about how do we reconcile, how do we find a pathway towards mending the color line based off what Douglas had to say in this speech?
Joe Vecchione?
Yes, I appreciated how your emphasis on the word you and your family versus, it made me think about that, which I hadn't thought of before. And then there was one of the first two paragraphs where it talked about how the people got upset about King George giving taxes to this country. And it's like they weren't even realizing, wait a minute, you're taking all the people are doing this labor, and yet they're getting not paid at all for what they're doing. And you're just completely, that's just going over your heads. Thank you.
Appreciate that, brother. Any other folks?
William France.
Oh, this is Donna Franz.
Donna, thank you.
I thought that the last two paragraphs where he expressed hope was premature, and his hope was based on, communication being more rapid in those days than previously. And we've talked about that in terms of the internet, which now seems like a double-edged sword, because sometimes you get education from the internet and sometimes you get the opposite, the propaganda messages that perpetuate a bad information. So I felt as though today, though, I mean, when I learned history, I didn't ever hear about the Black Wall Street. I never even heard about after Reformation, Reconstruction, how Jim Crow just perpetuated slavery in essence. And I'm learning that now, and I'm 70. But it's just amazing to me that the history that wasn't told. So I think there's hope in that, really hope in that now, because we witnessed a horrible murder and it was so casually done, I think that the best thing that's come out of that is that white people are learning and white people are writing about white privilege. And there's a great tide of change in how people are just becoming aware of this and how much suffering has been perpetuated because of systemic systemic upholding of racism, of slavery and racism. So I think the awakening seems to be now, and I'm hoping that those last two paragraphs, support the hopefulness that's there.
Thank you, Donna.
I want to recognize Helen Mulkey on the phone.
Yes, good morning. I'm drawn back to a few times in Douglas's speech that he brings forward and puts right in the center the words from the Declaration of Independence. And as a person who's been studying Douglas and Lincoln in some depth recently, I was very drawn to also notice how direct and center Abraham Lincoln spoke of 77 years ago, our forefathers brought forth on this continent a nation conceived in liberty and propositioned that all men are created equal in his Gettysburg Address, which at that same time he had in his mind to make sure that he would choose the best moment politically so that the war would be won to come forward with the Emancipation Proclamation. And so for me, the words of hope today are back at that Declaration of Independence, which is in a kind of a counterbalance to the formal processes of the Constitution of the United States. And I think Douglas also saw the Declaration of Independence as the leading light, the North Star, the pole, so that when constitutional questions arise, we can be drawn forward thinking that this is a constitution of the living. This is a constitution that needs to grow, to include, to resolve, to bring into a new birth. And of course, with the end of the war and with Reconstruction and with the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, that was the rebirth. And some people refer to those amendments as the second birth of the country. So yes, I find great hope in the North Star of the Declaration in balance with the Constitution as we go forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. One comment on that briefly, and that is, while we have to have that hope and we have to continue to drive forward, one of the realities of hopes too is really recognizing the fact that we have to be cautious too of how we think about the romanticization of American history, and the fact that we have to hold those truths and those aspirations up high, but we have to continue to be critical of folks, even Brother Abraham Lincoln too, who operated under certain aspects of white supremacy too, and our indigenous brothers and sisters know what that looks like too. Thank you so much for that comment.
Don Shand.
Eddie, to your question, I'm thinking about the line in this speech, we need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake, which I just think is, beautiful rhetoric. What do you think is the storm, the whirlwind, and earthquake we need in Newburyport right now?
Oh, sister, hey, I appreciate you asking that question. That's going to require a radical reconfiguration of everything. All systems, all populations, all communities, even the one that I exist right now, have to be absolutely blown up. They have to be blown up in a sense that folks need to think about, I love to know from folks, how many people have been taught this stuff, who heard this stuff in their history classrooms as they were growing up. We think about Newburyport in this greater community too. What's the community doing to provide affordable housing to low-income folks? And yet, instead of the exploitation and the system of racial capitalism that exists, how are they inviting marginalized Black and brown folks who look like me to live and exist in that space, and not to be just mere tourists, nor folks who are engaged in aspects of commodification and transactions, and really bringing profit values to that community too. So, Newburyport, yep, it's the great northern white liberal hope, but it has a lot of examination to do. And if they're going to do that, like a lot of other communities, they're going to have to step back and then look at the mirror critically and find themselves in a place of discomfort. And that's a long conversation that's going to happen. But, you know me, I'm just being honest and I'm being truthful. That's what I see when I walk up the streets of downtown Newburyport daily.
Kathy Deslett.
Yeah, I think what I have to say is sort of a follow-on, and that is that the first thing as white Americans we need to do is take responsibility, that we need to see that we're part of the problem, even if we didn't do it ourselves, even if we have the right ideas, even if we think we're really good people, even if we've tried, we need to take full responsibility that we're part of this. We have benefited from this. I grew up really poor, and I thought for years that being poor was the worst depression, but that was something I could grow out of. You can't grow out of the color of your skin, and you can't grow out of years of systematized oppression. So we need to learn what happened, and we need to take our responsibility for it. And also we need to recognize that the leadership in this can't be from us, that it needs to be from Black and brown people, because we need to give back the power that we took away. That's what I think we need to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Stan Barrett.
Yes, in answer to your question about hope for reconciliation across the divides, your fathers and my fathers. In spite of the fact that his hope near the end of the speech is certainly appears to be very premature, still I think that is within the speech anyway a basis for hope, for ongoing hope for reconciliation, but not just in what he said, in what he chose to do when he began the speech. He began the speech as if he were identifying in a certain way, in spite of the fact that he used your fathers. He laid out and spoke to those values, and almost as if he were claiming them for himself. And I like to think he claimed them for himself. We would say now that it was an aspirational, that was aspirational on the part of the, quote, fathers, my fathers, not his fathers. But I also find myself finding hope not only in his choice, because you could say he was just being smart in starting the speech that way. He was just being smart, but I choose to believe that it was heartfelt too. And it just comes up for me in the moment as I was waiting my turn to speak, how deeply moved I was when I first heard Marian Anderson's concert in 1939 at the Lincoln Memorial. And what did she choose to sing? America, to start. And I was moved to tears and to sobbing, because it felt like a love letter that we didn't deserve, we white people. And I am also just reminded of what I heard, I think, on PBS NewsHour recently, the woman who was being who had been protesting. I don't remember her name. Clearly, a woman of color, who said they, me, we, white people should be glad we, she says, are asking for equality, not revenge. They should be glad we're asking for equality and not revenge. And that gives me hope. It gives me hope. Marian Anderson, that woman is looking for equality and not revenge. And that Douglas spoke of hope. And I choose to believe, I'll say again, I choose to believe he spoke that not just from his heart and not just because it was a smart thing to say.
Yep. Hey, Stan, appreciate that thought. You know, one of the things we got to keep in mind too is, you know, Douglas wrote this in 1852. And we know that by 1875, as Reconstruction's coming to an end here in this country, he's going to ask a different type of question where he's going to ask, you know, if war among the whites brought peace and liberty to the blacks, what will peace among the whites bring? And we know, of course, that came the age of Jim Crow that followed, right? And we have not even escaped that much from Jim Crow to police brutality to inequities in employment and healthcare. So again, we all have to persevere and live by this notion of hope, because without hope, it's fatal. And many of us are struggling with that word hope today. Brother Obama said that once, hey, we're here for hope. But sometimes that light's losing its shine, and we got to continue to do what we have to do to try to energize that shine as much as possible.
Ronald Hurtle? You may have to accept the unmuting.
Yes, Eddie, regarding what you just said, there's a quote I just heard that the South lost the war, but they won the peace.
Mm.
And that speaks to the Jim Crow laws and things that you spoke about. My comment is more controversial. In this speech, Frederick Douglass talks a lot about God, uses the word God. And it seems to me God has been misrepresented back in the South, where you got the very many religious leaders of the day who could justify slavery in the Bible. They somehow interpreted in the Bible. And today I still think that the religious leaders of many organizations can justify some of the negative issues, the inhumane issues that are taking place still in this country. How do they do that? And we got to address that. You know, they use God as a trump card, you know, and as a controlling entity to control people's behavior. And that was then, and it's still now.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. A book I would recommend is this brother named Chris Cameron, and he wrote a book on the free thinkers, particularly African Americans who are intellectual thinkers and yet may use the framing of God, because that's oftentimes is seen as a gesture and a greeting. But even Douglas struggled at times with his sense of religiosity too. If we think about the Deep South, and I'm from Montgomery, Alabama, you know, it's kind of like Dunkin' Donuts up here. There's a Baptist church on every single corner. And yet we've seen the unjust that comes out of the tunes of certain folks when it's about Black and brown or LGBTQ folks too. But yeah, absolutely. That's where that critical framing comes into place.
Eddie, would you mind sharing the title and author of that book one more time? I'll put it in the chat so that people can access it on their own. Yep,
it's Chris Cameron. He's the chairperson at University of North Carolina, I think Charlotte, and the work is on Black free thinkers, people like Douglas and W.E.B. Du Bois, and folks who oftentimes use that language of God and religion, but yet we're constantly wrestling with this notion that Christianity was white.
Great. I have shared the author and that with everybody in the chat if you want to check it out for yourself, just in case it gets lost and people forget. We'll now hear from Bill Quigley.
First of all, I just want to say how impressive this conversation is, and I feel privileged to be listening to the thoughts of folks. I guess what I want to say is that I'm kind of astounded at the generosity of Douglas in those last two paragraphs, saying that the Constitution is not a pact with evil and with the devil. And earlier in the speech, of course, he had pointed out that the Fugitive Slave Clause is right there in the Constitution, for instance. So he's holding up both the Declaration, but then at the end he comes around and he says, and this is why he split with Garrison. Garrison said it was a pact with the devil and we should burn the Constitution. And Douglas says, no. And to me, that's just extraordinarily generous. And he's a man of words. Oh my goodness. So he knows what's in that Constitution. And as someone said earlier, now we have the Constitution with the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. So it has been, in a sense, purged of all of the sanction of slavery. But so he saw something else. He sees something between the lines, I guess, in the Constitution that he's holding on to. And we now have the Constitution, and it's repudiated slavery. And yet we still live with the sins of the past. People, we see it now, with the masks in the pandemic. Some people say that, don't tread on my liberty and tell me not to, tell me that I have to wear a mask. So people are going to read these documents and they're going to justify whatever they want to justify. And I guess my final thought is that he knew that in his day. There are the Christians who claim that of that day that slavery was ordained by God. And of course, he repudiates that in this speech. And still today, we have people who are going to invoke American doctrine to support actions, beliefs, behaviors that are really reprehensible, that are really contrary to what I think is really what America's all about. And so we still have to act. We still have to act on our beliefs, because there's going to be other fellow Americans who are going to act otherwise, and they're going to invoke the same doctrines, but they're going to see them differently. Right? We're going to see that in this election year again.
Bill, and David Blight talked about how Douglas was being prophetic, particularly by 1852, and seeing the coming of the American Civil War as we get to the 1850s, with abolitionists and folks debating the nature of slavery, oftentimes inculcating things like biblical Christianity for justifications in the measurements of white supremacy. And yet, even here today, on July 5th, 2020, we're still debating slavery. We're still debating the absence of actual and real conversations. The United States government has offered no official apology to Black people for slavery. There's no real consideration for reparations today. And yet, we're seeing this guy in the White House who defends Confederate monuments. All of that still in 2020. It's still here.
Before we move on, as I see the number of folks who have their hands raised to share a comment or a question, if you feel like you have raised your hand, but it's not showing up to me, just send me a little private message in the chat so I can make sure everybody who wants to share or ask a question gets a chance to. Sometimes Zoom will eat somebody's request, and I just want to make sure everybody gets a chance. Now we'll hear from Sophie Godley.
Thank you, Justin, and thank you, Eddie, so much for your remarks today. And I have a confession to make, which is that as a white person who's been working on my own racism and spreading messages and trying to educate folks around an anti-racist philosophy, I have lost hope over the last couple of weeks. I have been very depressed and disheartened and very just in a bad place. And hearing and participating in this today and hearing Frederick Douglass' words, which every time I hear this speech, I learn something new and discover something new. What struck me today was, if Frederick Douglass could be hopeful in 1852 with everything that he had witnessed and everything that he had lived through, how dare I give up? How dare I not be hopeful? Because it absolves me of action and responsibility. If I say, well, you know, this is never going to change, then somehow I'm off the hook. And that is reprehensible to me. So I appreciate so much you asking us that question, because I think it requires internal searching. And I am deeply grateful for the reminder about how important it is to stay engaged and stay angry and also stay hopeful. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you for staying angry. We got to have hope, but boy, for folks who are not upset, people who are not angry today, in this day and age, even my Black parents who live in the deep south of Montgomery, Alabama, who went to school and grew up under the legacies of Jim Crow, you know, they offer hope, but yeah, they're still angry too. And they're living out their lives as victims of white supremacy that exists up here in the great northern, in the liberal north too. So I appreciate that.
Ann White? You may have to accept the unmute request.
Are we
Is that-
unmuted now? Oh, wait a minute.
That working?
Yes, it's working.
Okay,
Oh,
great.
okay.
Thank
There
you.
you go.
Eddie, thank you for everything today. A lot of soul searching. And one thing that comes to mind is walking around Newburyport, admiring the beautiful architecture of our Federalist buildings and homes, where the wealth came to build Newburyport back in the 1800s and become this picture beautiful model city of the North. Obviously, rum was certainly a part of it. Cotton was a part of it. These products were sources of income, but from slavery. And I think we forget that. And we have models all over our town of having profited from slavery. But thank you again. Thank you. And hope, yes. And anger, yes.
We're going to be hosting a conference in Newbury next summer that's going to examine this area, how this area is complicit in slavery, and a deep examination of that. So yeah, absolutely. Appreciate your thoughts.
Ed Mayer?
I want to offer a little more hope here, I think. One of my heroes has always been William Sloane Coffin Jr., who was a freedom rider in the 60s and comes from the same family as the Coffin House. And there was another Coffin that was a conductor on the Underground Railroad. So I think there are some good things that have come out of Newbury and Newburyport, as well as bad things. But I think the greatest hope is in the young people under 40, let's say. When we made a lot of progress in the 60s, it was young people that were kind of taking the lead. And today, you know, the people out in the streets are, for the most part, at least the white people, are under 40. And I know from interacting with my daughter and her friends in college that they have a much better attitude than us old folks do. So I really see a lot of hope for reconciliation among young people in the future, probably after us old folks are gone.
Appreciate that. Absolutely. I think that extends beyond age and generation though, right? We all got to look deep and be soulful in terms of how we reach out and we we mend the color line. Thank you for that comment.
We'll hear from Desmine Ventura.
So I'm a student at the Governor's Academy where Eddie teaches, and I just wanted to share that like I never really thought of like the true meaning of like July 4th because I come from an immigrant family, so it's just another day to like barbecue. Really, I feel like other families just really do that, but I noticed that like there's a true privilege when it comes to like celebrating the 4th, and especially like with your chest. Like I find it like strange when people say like yes, like this is the greatest country, and ignore our placement in rankings when it comes to certain topics. But it's just unbelievable, especially on Instagram. Like you see photos of like fellow peers and students that like post and say like happy July 4th, but the common pattern is it's usually a cis white male that what's it called, has a great advantage in society. So I feel like time and time again it just proves that like people, those are the same people that deny that people like me and they would say like people like me like don't face racism. But I don't know, it's just strange, especially during these times, to see people like post so confidently like, yeah, this is the best country, we have the best president, and so forth. But yeah, thank you.
Dasmine, appreciate it. I'm gonna give out a shout out to the sister Dasmine here, folks, because y'all talking about young people who are gonna be leading the revolution and bringing about the kind of changes that needs to happen. Dasmine's one of those folks who's doing it, and she's asking the right questions. You know, people standing around and patting themselves on the back as we live in the greatest country on the planet, and who wouldn't want to live here? Yet they're not asking a question about the folks who are here, and yet they're faced and they're victims to the oppressive elements that exist. And to Douglas' point, you know, Douglas would say that, and some folks have brought this up before, that he is optimistic, he is hopeful that the criminality and oppressive nature here in this country could get better, and we're working on doing that. I think his tone softened a little bit as time went by, but yet we still have to continue to mold ourselves in a particular way where we can bring about those changes that are there. Yasmin, thank you for being a leader and making sure that happens and holding me accountable to helping and working with you and the rest of these folks here as we do those things.
Thank you for correcting me on the pronunciation of Dasmine's name. Thank you, Dasmine. We'll now hear from Tina's iPad. You may have to accept the unmute.
Eddie, thank you. Thanks for everyone here. To your point about the founders versus the framers, putting it in a larger context here that is at the very heart of one of the earlier participants who said that she felt very depressed. When you look at it from a founder's standpoint, there's a personal element there, which speaks to the point of transformation. And that's what Douglas invites us to do. Despite the hurt, he transformed himself. Whereas if you keep it at the level of framers, then you get into the debate that we are in now in terms of states' rights, strict constructionism versus liberal. This has been the perennial problem throughout all of history, even predating our country. So I like to think of it in terms of, and this is the invitation of the UUs. They're asking us to strike a balance between social justice and personal transformation. It's a fine line, and together we can walk that and also feel as if we've done right by ourselves and our countrymen. So I leave that for you, and thank you for all that you've done.
John, thank you for that outstanding comment. And you know what, I'm going to be honest with you. I think you're absolutely spot on. I think part of it is Douglas goes through his own navigational tools for his own transformation. That's a place that we all have to get to. I think the reality is, and we heard it from Dasmond a little bit ago, there are folks who are still struggling with their own transformation, and they have to use the tools of radical social justice in order to be heard. And hopefully folks who are on the margins will be invited into citizenship. Many folks as that white brother in the White House, Donald Trump, and the whole Mount Rushmore thing, right? People forget too that those folks had their land taken away and monuments built by white supremacists to parade white supremacy, and they have yet to feel a way to a transformation of citizenship because they've not been invited yet. And it's going to start with all of us. So that invitation is there. Thank you. I appreciate that.
We'll hear from Helen Mulkey on the phone.
Yes, I wanted just to say, when I get down, as many of us do these days, I keep on saying to myself, reminding myself, nope, it's not over. And why isn't it over? Because we're always looking at what is the next step? What must we do next? And to think strategically and plan ahead that way is, for me, a source of re-energizing and keeping true to the cause. Now, about a month ago, within the month, and I don't remember the date, I was totally aghast, and this is in the guise of something to work on next, because I think it's going to be coming up. Trump actually, speaking about immigration and about immigrants, was publicly, as president, deriding at a press conference, I believe, the whatever that, quote, terrible law that gives any person born in this country the right to citizenship. What a terrible law that is. We've got to do something about that. Well, that law is actually the 14th Amendment. And so this is just a red flag to everyone out there, that really be paying attention when you hear rhetoric like that, to be ready to act. So that's what I wanted to just flag. Thanks.
Hey, nope, thank you. Two things. One thing on that point is that the 14th Amendment has been under assault for a long time when it comes to citizenship. And, not to be overly political, but I'm a political brother too. And our Republican brothers and sisters aren't doing us much favors, particularly from the Deep South on that. The other thing that's been under assault more than anything is the fact, and Douglas couldn't really get to that point, though part of his aspirations was really making sure everyone could vote and participate in the political processes that exist. And yet we know since the Voting Rights Act of 1965, that's been pretty much gutted to this day. That doesn't exist at all. And so those are the things that we have to pay close attention to that's there. So thank you for your comment.
We have two more, and I think then we'll stop because we're nearing 12:30. But we'll hear from Paul W. and Ann and Chan Rice before we wrap up. So Paul W. first. You may have to. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Great to hear everybody. Very point and insightful conversation. Brother Carson, thank you for being Frederick Douglass for a day. I wanted to try to say something that's really obvious, and that what really struck me about the speech, which I love, and which is just a spectacular piece of American art and rhetoric, and that is what the stakes are in all this. And what the stakes are in all this are our bodies. I was very impressed with how Douglas went to great pains to talk about the difference between human beings and animals. And we are human beings, we have bodies. And he went to great lengths to evoke and describe what is being done to Black bodies in 1852. And here it is 2020, and we are watching on our phone videos what is being done to Black bodies right now. And I don't know what the answer is, but I just want to say, for me, I have a body. I need to love my body. I need to love the bodies of my fellow human beings, whatever they look like or sound like. I need to open up my love to other human beings right in front of me. Now I'm looking at this screen, I'm looking at your beautiful Black face on my screen, and I'm loving it, you know? And we got to do that. We have to somehow, with all of this amazing rhetoric and philosophy, we got to get inside our bodies and our hearts and have that love ready to turn on and accept that human being who is right in front of us right now. Even if it's a guy in a MAGA hat, or if it's a little kid, or if it's somebody who looks weird to you, love that person, man, because that's a human being. We got to start loving. That's it. Thank you.
Paul, thanks for that ontological point there. You know me, you know, I'm all about radical love, and I do fall short because I do sometimes struggle in loving those brothers with those Make America Great hats again too. But we're gonna have to get somewhere in making this change happen. And again, I think all of this is that we should be inspired by Douglas, as a sister earlier said, that in 1852 he was hopeful and he was looking to love folks in so many ways.
Our last comment question comes from Annan Chan Rice.
I just wanted to thank you for this conversation. I stumbled across Douglas's book the other day entitled My Bondage and My Freedom, which was sitting buried in the bookshelf somewhere. I don't know how it came into our house. It may have been through my daughter or son, or I may have picked it up years ago, but here it is. And I was stretching the other day in my bedroom and looked over to my left at a bookshelf full of books that I've never cracked, and there it was, and I pulled it out, and it said my bedside table. I am struck by the patience and the generosity, to use Bill Quigley's term, generosity of this man and the way he spoke in the eloquent way at a time where it would be very easy, it would seem to me, to just fold up the tent and do nothing. So the inspiration of him is quite incredible, and the inspiration of all the people that participated today. Their comments have been inspiring as well, including you, Eddie, and thank you.
Hey, thank you. You know, I say there's one last thing before we all chime out of here and everything too, and that is there's something to be said about going back to what Paul 1 stated about space, in his radical space, even virtually, where we can come together and we can think about the things that exist. And again, we have to be hopeful. I'm in a dark space these days. I've been in a dark place for a long time, and we've got to find some kind of light to move ourselves forward. So I appreciate everyone from jumping on.
All right, thank you all so much for participating. Whether you are listening or reading a passage or two or adding to the discussion, it was amazing and worked even better than I could have hoped. You know, this speech was given by Douglas 168 years ago today. His words are still so relevant and worth examining in today's social and political culture. And I hope all of you continue this discussion in your own homes, in your own social groups. So keep learning and educating and communicating, and our best to everyone. And thank you so much again.